Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about The Passenger and Stella Maris by Cormac McCarthy. I'm going to try to split it up into talking about The Passenger first and then Stella Maris, but it'll most certainly bleed together because they're so interrelated. And then after that, I'm going to talk about books that I thought about while I was reading the two. And then I'll make probably another video or another two videos where I talk about some related things to the books. So that's the plan. We'll see how that goes. So first thing is, I got the books immediately when they came out, October 25th for The Passenger. I think I read it in about 4 days. And then, middle of work and everything, I carved out as much time as I could. I took the day off. I took October 25th off, half of it, so I could read. And then, about a month later, a couple weeks ago now, Stella Maris came out December 6th. And at that point, I decided to go ahead and get one of the box sets because it was clear to me after reading The Passenger first and then getting a feeling for Stella Maris that it should have been published together. And I even think you get that impression from the box set itself. So I'm going to go ahead and show it here. So I have just the single copy of The Passenger that I got the day it was published. And so that's how I read that one first. And then December 6th, I went ahead and got the box set, which is much, much nicer than get the nuclear blast there, which you don't get. It's not clear at all from the hardcovers individually done, but that ties it all together, I think. With the contrast of the blue of Alicia, presumably, and then the blast of the brother and the dad is kind of the connection I was making. But anyway, yeah, I definitely think, I'm gonna have a few theories in this video. The colloquial theory. That my theory is that it should have been it was intended to be put out together. Clearly that was partially a goal, even with how it was put out now, but I think it should have been put out either in one book or in a box set to start off with. I definitely think The Passenger should be read first, and then Stella Maris if you're reading it the first time, because what you get out of The Passenger is altered by Stella Maris, and I think that's the way it was meant to be. So I definitely think Passenger should come first, and that's the way I read it. But I think they should have been published together, and I can only imagine when they put out paperbacks that for the artistic continuity of it, they'd publish them together, but maybe to make more money, they'll publish them separately. Not implying that McCarthy needs more money or cares to make more money, but certainly the publishers would be compelled to do that. If you heard about the recent Bob Dylan debacle where they were printing on signatures in his books and selling them for $600, publishers do anything. And if the artist is not smart enough, they'll be taken advantage of. And McCarthy's quite a smart guy, so he's not being taken advantage of. But anyway, so my first impressions in the book when I read it, I read it pretty much in two chunks, where the first day I got about halfway through. I think I got about page 200 or so. And then I sprinkled in a little bit of reading the next 2 days because I had a lot of work to do and a lot of things to do. And then I'm pretty sure it was about the fourth day, so probably October, maybe 29th or so, 28th. I finished off the last maybe 150 pages. And so I read it pretty quickly, and I haven't gone back and done like a full reread or anything. I reread the last maybe 30 pages once over, like right after I finished pretty much, because it was so striking to me. And then I reread multiple passages, and several of which I'm going to read parts of in this video. So it definitely reads quickly. And I also need to say, I should have said it earlier on, but I don't really believe in spoilers. So if you do and you haven't read the book, don't watch this. But so just fair warning. So it is a very quick read. The way I was kind of conceptualizing it is, thinking of all of McCarthy's other work, I viewed it as Suttree, but written in the prose style of a No Country for Old Men, or, kind of blending in with Cities of the Plains, very clear-sighted is the word that I was thinking of as I was reading through it. This book is very clear-sighted in more ways than one, but the prose style is one of them. Comparing it to my favorite book, Suttree, that is a very intricate and dense, in the best way, book. Style, themes, everything, characters. And in The Passenger, you do get the, slice of life, the talking, friends talking, just day in the life kind of stuff, working at your job, going home. You get that, which is the connection I make to Suttree, but then you get the kind of like pseudo plot thriller styling of a No Country for Old Men. And of course, he plays with the genre predictions. And then you get the style of like a No Country for Old Men. So it's very clear writing, some clipped sentences, but then you do get the long sequences. I think two of which I'm going to read. The one I'm going to start with is on page 115 of the hardcover. It's the well, I guess I'll just go ahead and jump right into it. So it's the section right after Bobby finds out Euler has died. And that starts us off really on one of the main motifs in the book, is abrupt loss, that over and over and over in Bobby's life, he experiences loss with no warning and no closure, really. And precedes this book is the loss of his sister, Alicia. And then really early on, you have him develop this relationship with Euler, who's his work buddy. They are both salvage divers, and we get introduced to them right in the very beginning. That excerpt that was put out, they go into this, airplane, and the missing passenger and all this stuff. So we get introduced to him, and he's really like the first friend we see Bobby have. And if I remember correctly, he's also the first one to go. Right before the passage that I want to read, he goes down to Venezuela to work. Company sends him down there to make more money or whatever. Or he goes down there to make more money or something, and he dies abruptly. And one of his friends just says, "Oh, yeah, I guess you haven't heard." And he says, "Heard what?" And he says, "Well, there's no way to put it. Euler's dead." And then he just, Bobby's just, "Oh, God," "God damn it," kind of thing. And then right after that, we have an Alicia section, kind of split it up, but the continuity of Bobby. He goes, in the evening he went down to the bar and got a hamburger and a beer. No one spoke to him. When he went out, Josie tilted her chin at him. "I'm sorry, Bobby," she said. So, they must have all heard. And then we get down one paragraph. So this is page 114? No, that's 115. Old women lighting candles. Oh, when he got to the cathedral, he went up the stairs and went in. Old women lighting candles. The dead remembered here, who had no other being and who would soon have none at all. His father was on Campagna Hill and with Oppenheimer at Trinity. Teller, Beta, Lawrence, Feynman. Teller was passing around suntan lotion. They stood in goggles and gloves like welders. Oppenheimer was a chain smoker with a chronic cough and bad teeth. His eyes were a striking blue. He had an accent of some kind, almost Irish. He wore good clothes, but they hung on him. He weighed nothing. Groves hired him because he had seen that he could not be intimidated. That was all. A lot of very smart people thought he was possibly the smartest man God ever made. Odd chap, that God. There were people who escaped from Hiroshima and rushed to Nagasaki to see that their loved ones were safe, arriving just in time to be incinerated. He went there after the war with a team of scientists. My father. He said that everything was rusty. Everything looked covered with rust. They were burnt-out shells of trolley cars standing in the streets. The glass melted out of the sashes and pooled on the bricks. Seated on the blackened springs, the charred skeletons of the passengers with their clothes and hair gone, and their bones hung with blackened strips of flesh. Their eyes boiled from their sockets. Lips and noses burned away, sitting in their seats laughing. The living walked about, but there was no place to go. They waded by the thousands into the river and died there. They were like insects in that no one direction was preferable to another. Burning people crawled among the corpses like some horror in a vast crematorium. They simply thought that the world had ended. It hardly even occurred to them to think that anything had anything to do with the war. They carried their skin bundled up in their arms before them like wash that it not drag in the rubble and ash, and they passed one another mindlessly on their mindless journeyings over the smoking afterground. The sighted no better served than the blind. The news of all this did not even leave the city for 2 days. Those who survived would often remember these horrors with a certain aesthetic to them. In that mycoidal phantom blooming in the dawn like an evil lotus, and in the melting of solids not heretofore known to do so, stood a truth that would silence poetry 1,000 years. Like an immense bladder, they would say, like some sea thing, wobbling slightly on the near horizon. Then the unspeakable noise. They saw birds in the dawn sky ignite and explode soundlessly and fall in long arcs earthward, like burning party favors. He sat for a long time in the wooden pew. And, just reading it again, it reminds me of the scene in Suttree where Suttree is in the church and he's thinking, just letting his thoughts rush over him like in this one. And, this passage really struck me because for worse, almost certainly, I've always been interested, since I was a little child in World War II. And I definitely think that that's affected me in the long run, but it's no consolation that World War II is over, that the Holocaust is over, that the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are over, that the mass genocides and rapes and bombings and conscription and starvation, the worst war in human history, is also one of the most recent. And it's no consolation that it's over. Like people think of it as relief. Oh, thank goodness it's over. but it might as well be happening right now. And I think that's part of the idea in this passage that, I mean, he has a much closer connection to it than I do. You know, his father helped build these nuclear weapons that were used on people. Only the United States has actually used nuclear weapons, to kill other people. And I think that says a lot. Touches on some things that Pynchon thinks about in Gravity's Rainbow, but in America we hear the America's the victor, we did everything right, there was nothing bad happened here, New York wasn't bombed, Los Angeles wasn't bombed, this sort of thing. They invaded Alaska, but that doesn't count, whatever. And this idea that nuclear bombs silenced poetry for 1,000 years. There's in The Sunset Limited, McCarthy also has another line that Western culture was burned black in the smoke of Dachau. And I struggle with this idea because, of course, you don't want to believe it's true. You don't want to believe that, at least confining it to Western culture back in World War II, you don't want to believe that we've destroyed ourselves so securely that, there's nothing to salvage out of it. Even if that's true, you don't want to believe it, and you might just not believe it, even if it is true. But I do think that at least American culture has not come to terms in the slightest with World War II, even though it was 70 years ago and the vast majority of people who lived through it are now gone. Generally, when I hear people talk about it, and I try not to hear it too much because generally it's pretty uneducated, it's especially related to the nuclear bomb, it's some mindless total pacifist saying, oh, how could these people be so stupid? Or it's the kind of, well, it had to be done, and I think you hear an argument later on in Stella Maris, a land war would have killed 1 million people or whatever. And that's not satisfying either. Why didn't we use 3 nukes or whatever, just to make sure? Or why wasn't only 1 used? That kind of thing. So there's no satisfactory thought or conclusion you can come to about it. And I've been doing research myself into the 1950s, late 40s, 50s, and early 60s before Kennedy was assassinated, as pretty much the foundational period for our current time. Everything that's happening now was set in place in that time period. I first had that idea from the recognitions. I mean, every problem you could think about today is mentioned in the recognitions, in any meaningful problem. So that means it was all obvious by then to people who were paying attention, and it was just kind of allowed to happen. But I've been doing a lot of research in the 1950s, and with that, the Cold War and the scientific revolutions that happened then. And that connects to something later on that is said in Stella Maris. I did reread Stella Maris, not page for page, but I reread most of it by skimming through and remembering certain sections that I wanted to reread. So I remember Stella Maris, and also I read it more recently. So I remember Stella Maris a little better than I do remember The Passenger. But there's another line in Stella Maris that talks about, fire, or language, fire, and then you have nuclear bombs as the 3 most epoch-making inventions of humanity. And nuclear bombs might end up being the most consequential. It's just, right now they're in 3rd place, but they might eventually be 1st place. And in that same way, it's no consolation that we haven't had a nuclear war yet, because now there's a renewed interest in it. But even before this war in Ukraine, with Ukraine and Russia as kind of a proxy war, even before that, there could have been a nuclear war in most parts of the world, could have launched it off. So it's just because it hasn't happened yet is no consolation. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the major concerns, and I'm really excited for Christopher Nolan's new movie coming out next year, the Oppenheimer movie with Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer, who I think is pretty perfect for that. All right, I'll go to the next section here. I don't want to talk for the passenger more than an hour, but we'll see. So the next section I want to read is about 150 pages later. I'm skipping over a lot of the sections where, there was more. Bobby went back to go look for the passenger again to check himself and make sure there was no one there, and it had been tampered with. Then we hear the story about, Bobby getting all this money, digging up these gold coins, Alicia getting some, Bobby getting some, him going to be a race car driver and ending up with metal in his head. We hear about that. He talks with this private investigator, Klein, to kind of figure out why he's being followed, why he's being messed with like the IRS is freezing his assets, and they raided his home and this sort of thing. So we never find out anything about the passenger, really, and I think that's a very meaningful point to be had about the book and modern life. But also, we gradually see, and then of course John Shedden, who is probably the second most important character in the book, I would say. But it's a series of losses. And thinking of the title of another book I'm recently reading, An Inventory of Losses. It's just a catalog of things that are gone, and gone too soon. He gets his car taken away. He gets his cat is taken, and at some point he's asked, why didn't you get a new cat? And he responds that he couldn't handle another loss. He's all lost out. And that was really one of the most devastating lines in the book, I think, because of course Cormac McCarthy's writing this. So, he's in his 80s. He's lost, all of his family, almost certainly, except for his younger brother. I know he's still alive. He's lost, parents, grandparents, bunch of friends. And even if they're not dead, people drift away, divorces, children and this sort of thing. Even if you're near each other physically, you might be far apart. And, you don't need to know anything about McCarthy personally to know that as you get older, it's just an inventory of losses. You just think about how many things are lost culturally, traditionally, linguistically, and personally. You just lose everything until the very final loss at the end. And I think, let's see, the next passage I have, he doesn't just, go into that good night, for nothing, easily, weakly. He, in certain ways, fights against it. And that's why I think this idea that this book is somehow nihilistic is anyone who thinks that, you can't read. These people can't read. I don't know why they're reading if they read so poorly to think that a book like this is nihilistic. And some proof of that it's not nihilistic, is there's a section on page 282 is where it starts that I'm going to start reading. Bobby encounters his sister's hallucination, the thalidomide kid, because of course this book is interspersed with chapters from Alicia's perspective, but it's italicized, so we're not certain if this is a true relation of events, if this is how Bobby remembers her, if this is truly what she was like. But it's her speaking, and then we see her hallucinations kind of personified. So it's in some sense it's an internal view, but it's only an internal view in the sense that we see what she says to her hallucinations, and we hear or see what they do back, what they say back. But at this point, her hallucinations mix with Bobby's reality. And I think that's a key point of the duology, the pair of books. And I'll get to that a little later, but this section here. Oh yeah. Oh, and this was the page. Do you mind terribly if we don't loiter? How come you never got another cat? I just didn't want to lose anything else. I'm all lost out. Why is the lamp of wrong always sheltered from the wind? Anyway, you still got yourself to go. I know. What's your thoughts on that? The sooner the better? Sometimes. A sharp crack of lightning lit up the empty beach before them. The rain began to pelt down. Who knows, said the kid. Maybe you and Sis can rendezvous in the sweet by and by. Jesus, look at this shit. Pain and corruption. The time she went behind my back. Sometimes she'd just douse the lights and go to sleep, mid-sentence. She'd have been a piece of work no matter what. Mary and Joseph, did you see that? Can we step it along? Don't you just love the taste of ozone? And then, they talk together for a little longer, and it's really not clear how this is possible, but the way I took it is that he'd fallen to his knees in the wet sand. The salt rain blew off in the sea. He seized his skull and called out after that small and shambling figure receding down the beach in the gusts. So I took it as he is trying in his, most foregone moments, trying to cling on to the only thing that's keeping him alive, and that's anything. At this moment, it is anything connected to his sister, and what his brain creates, what his unconscious creates, is this hallucination that he must have heard about from her. At least that's my understanding of it. So, because he doesn't want to give up, he recreates the thing that will keep him alive, and that's a connection to his sister. And then we hear this. He sat on a driftwood log with his face in his hands. You don't know what you're asking. Fateful words. She touched his cheek. I don't have to. You don't know how it will end. I don't care how it will end. I only care about now. In the spring of the year, birds began to arrive on the beach from across the gulf. Weary passerines, vireos, kingbirds, and grosbeaks, too exhausted to move. You could pick them up out of the sand and hold them trembling in your palm, their small hearts beating and their eyes shuddering. He walked the beach with his flashlight the whole of the night to fend away the predators, and toward the dawn he slept with them in the sand, that none disturb these passengers. So of course we see the title show up again, and that's just another one of those devastating passages. That because the page right before, I'm all lost out, and then we just have this kind of just this last resort of trying to protect the unprotected, to help the unhelped. You know, the weary existence that you're thrown into life, and you just have to make the best out of it, and sometimes just you by yourself is not enough. And in that sense, Bobby is alone, and he's just trying to scramble for anything that'll keep him going. And one of those things is helping these little birds. And I just, if you read that and you think the book's nihilistic, like, just quit reading. Just like get rid of all of your books. No point in reading any philosophy, no point in watching any thoughtful movies, no point in listening to any music where you have to hear the lyrics. Like, just give up. Just give up. But because that's like one of the most touching and like enheartening things you can read. I mean, I relate myself to teaching is a very difficult job. It's difficult in a different way than things like salvage diving are difficult, of course. But, I have 180 students, and they're all living their own lives, and, I see them all every 2 days, and you get to know them, and you get a little glimpse into their life, and some of the glimpses are very tragic, just by the sheer numbers of it, you're going to have some terrible things come up in the students' lives that you'll find out about if you care at all, which, of course, some teachers don't. Self-protection or whatever, laziness. But, teaching really is a filter on your whole society. So, in many ways since teaching, I've become much more pessimistic. But it gives you the opportunity to, narrowly focus on just helping people. So it, in some way, it makes things much worse, even at a relatively, privileged area that I teach at. So, that's kind of the way I think about it. If you have nothing to live for, remember that there are these, little 2-year-olds, slugs basically, crawling around, don't even know any English yet or whatever language they're going to learn. And you have to keep the world going for them. You can't give up, even if they're not your kids or anything. I mean, you have to keep the world going for these poor 2-year-olds, with like getting blasted by their senses at all moments of the day until they get some respite in their naps. You have to keep the world going for them. So at the very least, very least, when things seem most grim, that none should harm these weary passengers. So I won't be able to connect that to my next passage, but we'll just deal with it. So this next passage is an Alicia section. And this one struck me because it made me think about any creative pursuit, and it also connected to The Recognitions, one of my other favorite books. So this is a bit of a longer passage too, 1 paragraph, but it's kind of a long paragraph, so I'm just going to read it, talk a little bit about it, and then I have one more passage after this that's much shorter. All right. So this is an Alicia section, page 297, so less than 100 pages from the end. So she's talking to the kid, they're back and forthing, and she's talking about her calculations. You really want me to talk about this? Sure. All right. It's not just that I don't have to write things down. There's more to it than that. What you write down becomes fixed. It takes on the constraints of any tangible entity. It collapses into a reality estranged from the realm of its creation. It's a marker, a road sign. You have stopped to get your bearings, but at a price. You'll never know where it might have gone if you'd left it alone to go there. In any conjecture, you're always looking for weaknesses, but sometimes you have the sense that you should hold off. Be patient. Have a little faith. You really want to see what the conjecture itself is going to drag up out of the murk. I don't know how one does mathematics. I don't know that there is a way. The idea is always struggling against its own realization. Ideas come with an innate skepticism. They don't just go barreling ahead. And these doubts have their origin in the same world as the idea itself. And that's not something you really have access to. So the reservations that you yourself, in your world of struggle, bring to the table may actually be alien to the path of these emerging structures. Their own intrinsic doubts are steering mechanisms, while yours are more like brakes. Of course, the idea is going to come to an end anyway. Once a mathematical conjecture is formalized into a theory, it may have a certain luster to it, but with rare exceptions, you can no longer entertain the illusion that it holds some deep insight into the core of reality. It has in fact begun to look like a tool. And then the kid just responds, Jesus. So it just smacked me in the face of being so similar to Gaddis's ideas and the recognitions of one of his key points of, thank God there was the gold to forge. Thank God that there's this perfection in our mind that we're able to copy and forge in some way in reality, even though it's imperfect. Anything that you take from your perfect realm, from your idea, from your thought, as soon as you place it in reality, it becomes distorted. And in some way, it becomes imperfect. I think that's like a clear point from the recognitions that applies to this, very directly. With art, with any idea, with engineering or whatever, it all applies. Architecture, movie making. I mean, God forbid, nothing is perfect there in that way, because you have to rely on so many people. But also, this idea becomes a tool, but also it takes on a life of its own. It's not just a tool. And that's kind of a point I thought about that I'll talk about more with Stella Maris. But, one thing I thought when I was reading that'll connect is I saw, and I've really been not reading like hardly any other reviews or watching videos about these books, because I kind of scoped out a couple and I was so disgusted and horrified that I was like, all right, I'm pretty much not reading anything else. But there was one good one by Joy Williams. She wrote about both, and that one was actually good. I think I'll actually link that one here in the description. But and then most of them have been just nauseatingly horrible and just disgusting. And multiple I've seen criticize McCarthy, especially with the character of Alicia, that she's such an impractical person. No one like this exists. And of course, as with anything, that says more about them than McCarthy. Because what they're saying is their imagination isn't able to construct a person like this. And inevitably, sometimes that's correct. Like if you can't imagine someone like this, then someone like this doesn't exist. Assuming you've met a lot of people, assuming you're, closely interested in human psychology, you have a good imagination, which most people don't have any of the three, let alone all three. But the main thing that's holding people back from imagining Alicia as a real person is they've never met someone who could be called a genius, or never looked into them closely, which clearly McCarthy has. One connection I have where I was not surprised in the slightest in the existence of a 20-year-old that's able to talk like this. That's what I've seen. Oh, no 20-year-old talks like this. I mean, you just haven't met any really smart ones. That's all it is. Which, if it exists without my knowledge, it exists without my consent. These people are doing this, judge behavior unintentionally, sure, but one of the things I was really interested in college was taking some cognitive psychology classes, like developmental psychology, psychology of language, that sort of thing. And my personal interest, I was researching highly gifted children, like not simply gifted children, but like top 0.1% kind of intellect or skill, talent, anything like that. Shockingly, there is very little research on it. There is massive amounts of research on, rather than highly gifted, highly disabled children, but there is like paltry research done on highly gifted children, which I think says a lot about our culture. But nothing about Alicia's portrayed ability surprised me. That is well within the realm of reason for one of these 1 in 10,000 people. Even 1 in 10,000. There are thousands of those people on Earth. And so just one of them existing, totally reasonable. Like, I've read Kurt Gödel's biography, it's the one by the mathematician, I can't remember his name, John something, but Kurt Gödel is just as weird as Alicia, if not more. Who else have I read? Yeah, I mean people that are talked about in the book. Grothendieck, super weird guy. Who else? Yeah, even Oppenheimer. I mean, he was very well educated and high status family, so taught manners and all this stuff. But even so, he was a very weird guy. People like Rimbaud, it's William Rowan Hamilton, the other like calculator kids, Zara something, the American that was calculating against him or whatever, learned a bunch of languages. Alicia fits in that category. So just in the idea that, she's not a real character because no one is like that, that is simply a limitation of the person saying that, not a limitation of McCarthy's ability to create. Because this passage, no 20-year-old says that. You just haven't met any smart ones. Which is a shame. Definitely, if you haven't, you should probably live your life differently. But that being said, this connection of your idea being placed in reality. Of course, McCarthy's thinking of this through writing. But mathematicians with conjectures, scientists with theories, trying to get your theory to match reality is, physics. And, I've been thinking about that a lot. This is one of the passages that has kept me thinking and kind of prevented me from wanting to talk about the book yet, because I couldn't have talked about it a month ago. It would have just been a, worthless, whatever view grab, which is probably what, a lot of the people who talked about it already. It's what it seems like. I skimmed a couple of the videos and I don't know, but anyway. So then after this passage, within the last 100 pages, Bobby ends up leaving New Orleans completely. He goes to, I think, Arizona or New Mexico or something. It was outside of Santa Fe, right? I think so. And then he goes up to Idaho, supposedly staying in a house owned by one of his father's friends. Just this like barren shack, in the winter. And there was this really funny passage that I'm going to read, just like a line or two of, but I thought it was just so funny because let's see, is it this? Oh yeah, right here, page 313. So he spent the winter in an old farmhouse in Idaho. And then a couple paragraphs down. In the mudroom, there were jars of fruit and tomatoes and okra, but he'd no idea how long they'd been there. Some iron harrow teeth in a wooden box, the bones of a mouse in the floor of a stainless steel milk can. He found an axe in the woodshed, but he'd no way to sharpen it. And when he came back from town again, he had a chainsaw and 2 boxes of paperback books. Victorian novels that he hadn't read and wouldn't, but also a good collection of poetry and a Shakespeare and a Homer and a Bible. Victorian novels he hadn't read and wouldn't. Damn, he's like me. Honestly, though, I've been trying to get more into Victorian novels. George Eliot is a standout, of course, but when you compare English Victorian novels to what's being written in America, France, and Russia of the time, just picking 3, Victorian novels are fucking embarrassing, compared to those. So I just thought that was a funny dig at Victorian novels because I pretty much feel the same way. Victorian poetry is a different story. Robert Browning is top tier, world class, but anyway, I just thought that was a funny dig. And then to go ahead and finish off the last, 30 or so pages, we get John Shedden dies. And if you didn't know, John Shedden was a real person in McCarthy's life. John Shedden, spelled exactly the same way, was one of his best friends in Knoxville when he lived there, apparently, back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, presumably. Seems like a very educated guy, had 2 master's degrees. I'm getting all this from Diane Luce. She wrote a book about McCarthy's Tennessee period, and another book is coming out this January, I believe, that's the year, January, maybe February of 2023, but keep an eye out for that, another Diane Luce of McCarthy's Tennessee period, his early works. So John Shedden is a real guy, and you can actually find books signed to him by McCarthy for sale right now. If you have $30,000 laying around, you can get The Orchard Keeper. Suttrie's not up, which I'm sure was sold privately for $100,000 or something, because the story goes that someone had said that John Shedden was the inspiration for Harrogate in Suttrie. Apparently that wasn't accurate because different guys, but I could easily see someone like McCarthy, making his friend some, crazy character and his friend getting a big kick out of it. But John Shedden, the book, calls Bobby a Western squire. And when I was reading The Gilded Age by Mark Twain, I realized that he was named Squire too, also from East Tennessee. So I can only imagine that there was some kind of joking connection there with Mark Twain and Bobby. But yeah, John Shedden is one of the great talkers. He's, kind of the Falstaff character, the positive side of the judge, maybe with a little bit of the negative. Just one of these really bright guys that does nothing in life and just passes away namelessly. And McCarthy does not allow that passage to be so nameless anymore. And I almost wonder if that's why he waited so long to publish it, because he wanted to, maybe it didn't feel right to put it out when his friend was alive, I'm not sure, but he definitely immortalized his friend in this book, that's for certain, in the same way that Shakespeare immortalized his close ones in the sonnets, and in the same way in the Dream of the Red Chamber, The Story of the Stone, the writer immortalized the girls of his childhood, the women of his childhood. All great books do that. They immortalize the time and the people of the writer. But you get to the very end of the book, Bobby has lost everything. Lost his car, lost all his money, lost his cat, lost all of his friends. Euler and John Shedden most importantly, and then Alicia's been lost for 8-9 years at this point by the end of the book. And then Bobby goes to Spain, and he ends up, oddly enough, another connection to the recognitions at the very end. He's basically nameless, goes to Spain, getting away from it all. Symbolically, he's dead, and he's just, kicking around. He lives in some windmill that I connected with the Napoleonic tower in the beginning of Ulysses, kind of this ridiculous, kind of not surreal, but just absurd, place to live. And this is really where I think McCarthy is kind of zooming out on life and looking at all of life and human existence, human history, civilization, the passage of the generations, ubi sunt theme, everything's gone, no more poetry, no more, what does progress mean anymore, and this kind of idea. Let's see. There's one line that stuck out to me. His is a world of blood and slaughter and the screams of men and animals, all of which he has little understanding of. The horse stands at the gate with his head bowed while the day breaks. That reminds me of a scene in Macbeth, when after King Duncan is killed, the terrible injustice and the horses declare war on mankind. He found a coin on the beach, an ill-formed disc of bronze washed all but barren by the centuries. He put it in his pocket. Remnants of vanished worlds in these outposts, like the bones of ships among the rocks of remote northern seas, the bones of men. He sent to Paris for a collection of Grothendieck's papers, and he sat by lamplight working the problems to connect with his sister. After a while, they began to make sense, but that was not the issue, nor the French. The issue was the deep core of the world as number. He tried to trace his way back, find a logical beginning, Riemann's dark geometry. His Christ-awful symbols, she had called them. Gödel's boxes of notes in Gabelsberger, the shorthand. And he had no photograph of her. He tried to see her face, but he knew he was losing her. And then we get to the very final page, where everything comes together. We see the kid show up again, the thalidomide kid, but I also think, something I'll talk about later, is that I think it's a connection to Beckett, the unnameable. He passes this old woman, scarcely 4 feet tall. He knew that he still hoped for that small and half-forgotten figure to fall in beside him, leaning into the salt wind with his hands in his pockets and his clothes flapping. He'd seen him one final time in a dream, God's own mudlark, trudging cloaked and muttering the barren selvage of some nameless desolation, where the cold sidereal sea breaks and seethes and the storms howl out from out of that black and heaving Alcahest, trudging the shingles of the universe. His thin shoulders turned to the stellar winds in the suck of alien moon's darkest stones, a lonely shore loper hurrying against the night, small and friendless and brave. And then this beautiful description right after. Spits of rain on the sill, summer lightning far out to sea, like the flare of distant field pieces. Just amazing. Like the flare of distant field pieces. God. And then we get to the final several paragraphs, which I couldn't help but connect to the end of Finnegan's Wake. So if you haven't, even if you haven't read all of Finnegan's Wake, just read the last page and connect and see if you see any similarities. The ages of men stretching grave to grave, and accounting on a slate, blood, darkness, the washing of dead children on a board, the stone laminations of the world with their fossil prints, unreckonable in form and number, my father's latter-day petroglyphs, and the people upon the road naked and howling. He bent over his grammar in the light of the oil lamp, the straw roof hissing in the bell-shaped dark above him, and his shadow on the rough-troweled wall. Like those scholars of old in their cold stone rooms toiling at their scrolls, the lenses of their lamps that were made of tortoiseshell, boiled and scraped and formed in a press, and the fortuitous geographies they cast upon the tower walls of lands unknown alike to men or to their gods. Finally, he leaned and cupped his hands to the glass chimney and blew out the lamp and lay back in the dark. He knew that on the day of his death he would see her face, and he could hope to carry that beauty into the darkness with him, the last pagan on earth, singing softly upon his palate in an unknown tongue. This video has already gone on for quite long, but I just think McCarthy's writing this in his 80s. He's 89. Around when this was published, he recorded a video with Lawrence Krauss, and he's looking pretty frail. We don't have him for much longer. But, my grandma passed away in 2020, early 2020. And she was born in 1928. McCarthy was born in 1933. And they've lived long times, and they've seen a lot of people come and go. And I just think that someone my age, I'm 27, what do I know? But I can imagine that as much as someone my age would not want to believe it, what we have to look forward to is just an interminable series of losses, disappointments, and unjustified hope. And that's about it. So, all right, well, I'm going to make a different video on Stella Maris, and maybe 2 other videos after that, we'll see. But, all right, I hope you enjoyed some of my thoughts on The Passenger. Let me know what you thought, and death is a gang boss.